Hey everyone, welcome to Queerly Recommended, the podcast where we recommend queer books, films, TV shows, and more. I'm Tara Scott. I review sapphic fiction at the Lesbian Review and Smart Bitches Trashy Books. This week, I am so thrilled to be joined by Frederick Smith, author of 6 contemporary novels with romantic elements, including 2 co-written with Chaz Lamar Cruz. The most recent is One and Done, which I recently recommended and raved about. If you haven't listened to me do that yet, go back and find that episode. But for now, welcome, Fred.
Thank you. Thank you. So happy to be here today.
So, for the people who are not familiar, who perhaps have not gone back and listened to that episode yet, can you tell them what One and Done is all about?
So my elevator pitch is it's a Black, queer, higher ed, college, Bay Area set romance novel. And it, obviously follows a central couple falling in love. Dr. Taylor James is an aspiring university president who wants to be one of the first Black and openly gay university presidents one day. And he is put in charge. He's currently a vice president at a university, and he's put in charge of the university's accreditation process, which is a process where universities go through a review every 8 to 10 years, make sure they're okay, student outcomes and things like that. He only allows himself one day a week to go out and have fun, Sunday Fun Day at a place called Beau in San Francisco's Castro area. And there he has a disastrous meet cute with Dustin McMillan, really arrogant about San Francisco, really arrogant, cocky, confident, very good looking, and things like that. And other than their love for Beyonce, lo and behold, a few days later, they realized that Dustin is the university accreditation person, so the person who'll be reviewing the university and forced to work with Dr. Taylor James on this project. So after a disastrous meet cute, they realize they have to work together, and then the romance and the friendship and everything else ensues.
I loved it. It was so fun. It was so cute. And I also really loved that the elements were subtle, but they were there about the increased scrutiny on administrators who are Black. Like it was so subtle, but there was something towards the end just referencing Claudine Gay and how she was so viciously attacked
Right.
and needlessly.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, what's that saying? I know they say it on Scandal a lot. Sometimes Black people feel like they have to be twice as good to get
Mhm.
half of the accolades or advancements that they've worked and earned for. And so, yeah, there's an element in the novel where I won't spoil it too much, but Taylor questions whether or not going to the university presidential level is what he really wants, because he knows that one, being Black, is one thing. Being Black and openly queer is a total other thing. Knowing how politics works in the United States and also how politics work in the universities, those are like two bam bams that people
Mhm.
may use against Taylor. So this is part of Taylor's thought process as he's considering whether or not he wants to advance from a university vice president to a president, is what is this going to open up for me, both in terms of my personal life, both in terms of my professional life, in terms of the people who are in the friend circle, any potential partners, etc. And so Taylor is very much aware of not only what it takes to become a university president, but also is very much aware of what will come with that as well in terms of working with the university community. Sounds kind of similar to what's happening in 2024 right now with
Mhm.
someone who's running for president, and they know what's coming. And I think that, for Taylor and for anyone else who's thinking about advancing, who comes from a minoritized background, they realize the attacks that are going to be coming. It's lifelong training, but it's also lifelong training, like just kind of learning that you got to keep moving, you got to
Mhm.
keep pushing on, regardless of the critiques that that are going to come. And so that's something that Taylor thinks a lot about in One and Done, and talks a lot about with the friend circle in the novel, with Dustin, who's the university reviewer, etc.
You haven't always written kind of strictly romance, although there is romance to what you're writing.
Yeah.
What brought this particular book about? Like, why romance? Why now?
Okay. So what really immersed me into the whole romance genre really was the pandemic. And when all of these book events went virtual, when we were stuck inside for health reasons, which I totally value, different authors would take their events and put them on Zoom. And so we could be all over the world, all over the US, all over Canada, watching authors talk about, so one, it was romance in particular. I was watching a lot of Alyssa Cole, Rebecca Weatherspoon, some other people who were putting on events with bookstores, getting us to, think about considering them, reading and stuff like that. And then as I started thinking about my own author career, I thought, this is a direction I really want to move into in terms of the more formulaic elements of romance novels because of one, the built-in audience that just loves
Mm-hmm.
romance and is open to trying all types of books and everything. But then two, because of my respect for the romance genre in general, knowing that romance keeps the lights on for most of the publishing industry,
Mm-hmm.
also knowing that and learning and respecting the fact that it has been a women-driven industry in terms of who writes, consumes, runs, edits, and knowing that sometimes, that women often face critiques for just wanting to be loved, wanting to have a
Yeah.
happily ever after, wanting to provide something that's going to provide some comfort for people. And so that made me respect romance even more. It made me want to take a deeper dive in terms of my author career into shifting from just contemporary with romantic elements into the romance genre itself. I've always written, primarily male-male romance, male-male couples, primarily Black characters, primarily, a few Latinx characters here and there,
Mm-hmm.
etc. But back to your question, it was pandemic 2020, 2021, events going virtual, and just growing in my love and respect for the authors who are part of our community, for the books that they were writing. Of course, I bought so many books during pandemic that are still
Mm-hmm.
on my nightstand. Some I open up, some I have on my devices. But that was just a really fruitful time when we were stuck inside, that really made me take the deeper dive into romance.
Have you noticed a difference in reception for One and Done compared to your other books that weren't kind of
Oh my
specifically romance?
goodness. Yes. And it's kind of scary and it's kind of
Uh-huh.
fun and it's kind of interesting. So,
Mhm.
my backlist, which I hope that people will explore after listening to this or while listening to this, is pretty extensive. Like I shared, does focus on male romantic elements, mostly in California, Los Angeles, or the San Francisco Bay Area. But One and Done, the reception has just been out of this world in terms of the novels I've written. Like, and it's
Yeah.
almost kind of scary, but it also makes sense too. I know that authors, so one piece of advice I often share with aspiring authors is that you're not going to come out the gate with a New York Times bestseller or a USA Today bestseller. That takes a lot
Mhm.
of building up, cultivating audience, cultivating friendships and relationships within the book community, the romance community, etc. But when I've seen things, responses to One and Done, it really makes me happy and proud that after 6 novels, I'm getting a really strong reception. Back in May of 2024, prior to the novel's publication, the Boston Globe did this list of the 75 books of the summer to read. And when I got that notification from my publisher, didn't
Mhm.
expect it, didn't know it. And I'm like, how'd the Boston Globe hear about this novel and put it on the list of 75 people?
Yeah.
Or even just as recently in July 2024, there was a feature on NPR about 8 romance novels.
That's
Um,
amazing.
and with some contemporary peers, romance peers, who I'm like, I fanboy you. We're on the same list and everything.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the response to One and Done has just been amazing. Many of the bookstores that I'm in relationship with say they can't keep enough on the shelf. I check the online retailers and I see that it says sold out, back ordered.
Mhm.
And so, I'm always kind of gently talking with the publisher about we got to get more books in print,
Yeah.
and I know how that works. I know that it's kind of a calculated gamble in terms of what's the print run going to be, how do we distribute and where and everything. But I've been very happy with the response to One and Done.
That is amazing. I mean, I don't know how, Boston Globe and NPR would hear about you per se, but I think also there's something very special about like it's hard enough in the first place to find male romance where it is two black men, two black men in higher education. You're not like I think you might have written the only one. I could be wrong. This is based on not doing a search, but like it's possible you've written the only one, but also that you're a queer black man writing it, knowing that so much of the male romance that's out there, because there is a tremendous amount of it. I found male romance and was reading it way before I found lesbian romance. Like it
Yeah.
was just easier to find because mainstream publishers were actually putting it out there, but it was almost exclusively written by women. And I think there are
Mhm.
readers now who want to know. And I'm one of them. That's why I picked up One and Done was, okay, but what happens when a man is writing
Yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
romance? And it's not just and recognizing that I may not be the target
Mhm,
audience
mhm.
because my hope would be, you're writing for men who want to see themselves first and foremost, like queer men who want to read about queer men, but also I'm sure you're quite happy to have anybody read your books, but it is different, and I can't explain why it's different from the others that I read, but there's just this, like, intangible quality, I think, that comes from writing from the self to a certain extent.
Mhm. Yeah, so like kind of in the own voices, conversation
Mhm.
that a lot of writers have in terms of what feels authentic, what's written in a way that you're not explaining things or over explaining things, to people.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna get back to the, who writes male and things like that. But there's this really great Toni Morrison interview that people can find on YouTube where she talks about that whole idea of own voices, but in the
Mhm.
sense of she was sharing in this interview that she could tell when a Black author was writing something with like a gaze, Gaze,
Yep, yep.
of a white or mainstream audience, because she
Mm.
said they were over explaining things that did not have to be explained if the
Yes.
person was willing to do some work and research and learning and immersing in communities and things like that. And so I always think about that interview with Toni Morrison, when I think about the whole topic of own voices and the respect that I have for people who eventually get their work out and they're from and of a community.
Mhm.
So, fun fact, I did not know that even as recent as like 2020, 2021, I didn't realize that quite a bit of male romance was written by women. I did
Yep.
not know that at all.
For
Um,
women too, like, for
and
a female audience.
yes, which is exciting.
Mhm.
I do believe that people can and have the capability of writing, whatever they want and everything. And I also think at the same time, I think it takes a certain sense of responsibility to, and I'm sure everyone works with beta readers. They have their groups of people, their focus groups and everything that kind of say, does this sound real? Does it sound authentic?
Mhm.
Is this what two men would do together? And so I took a couple of dives into a few recently, a couple of male romances written by people who identify as women, and I've read them, good novels. As
Mhm.
long as they follow the romance formula, I'm cool with that and everything. And there were times I would read stuff and I would be like, I don't know if that's how two gay men would connect with each other,
Mhm.
or something kind of like you were sharing, something just felt a little bit like either over-explained or not truly like, I don't even know how to put it.
Representative.
Yeah, and so going back to the whole question, I do think own voices is important. I do think that anyone
Mhm.
can write anything. I do think that it also takes a responsible author just to, you know, share it with others before publishing, asking questions, asking, is this responsible? Is this representative? But obviously, there's a market. And as long as there's
Yeah.
a market of readers and writers, we're going to fulfill everyone's reading desires.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to take go back in your history,
Okay.
and because of course this is a podcast about queer media of all kinds, but what was the first book or film with LGBTQ representation. It could really be any medium. Maybe it was a video game. I don't know. Maybe it was an
Yeah.
album. But what was the first that really had a big impact on you and why?
Okay. So there was an author, he's no longer with us. His name is Lynn Harris. He passed away in 2009. And he wrote a couple of books in the night, well, actually more like 10, 15 novels in the 90s and 2000s. The first books by him that I remember reading were Invisible Life and Just As I Am. And Elin Harris's books, and he was writing these long before people were like, embracing male-male romance.
Hmm.
This is back in the 90s and 2000s. Just As I Am, An Invisible Life follows the lives of Black gay men in the US South, I think primarily Atlanta area, but eventually they make their way to New York City. And it's like kind of college and just coming out of college, so kind of new adult, but also coming into their own in terms of either a gay awakening or a bisexual awakening. And when I read those novels, Just As I Am and Invisible Life, it was the first time in a novel that I truly felt like I saw myself as a Black gay person, and also gave a sense of validation, like, wow, there's a Black gay man writing about Black gay characters in
Hmm.
the South that was just so empowering. It was almost like, it's like, oh, this doesn't have to be hidden anymore. Even though as teenagers, we snuck the books around and we had to keep them in our backpacks or we had to hide them under the beds and things like that because of, life wasn't then what it is
Yeah.
now in 2024 and, and in the future and everything. And so Elin Harris was such a influence on me personally in terms of my own
Hmm.
personal development, as a Black queer man, and also in terms of seeing the possibilities as a writer as well. I know before Elin Harris, there was James Baldwin,
Hmm.
another writer named James Earl Hardy, who was kind of a peer with Elin Harris. But Elin Harris's novels were the first where I really felt seen and felt validated as a, wow, it's possible for me, you know, little Black boy growing up in Detroit,
Yeah.
Michigan, to aspire to be an author, to tell my own stories about people who I see and who look like me and who come from backgrounds such as me. And so I am always so thankful for the books of Elin Harris. And I always encourage current readers to take a deep dive into backlists of authors who maybe aren't, getting the splashy bookstagram posts every week and things like that. Take a deep dive in the people who paved the road for the books that we see today. And so, yeah, I always go back to Elin Harris as being instrumental in my personal and professional and author life.
Oh, that's huge. I wonder, do you know if he's still in print?
He is still in print.
Oh, amazing.
And what's so exciting about Elin Harris's books is that he was making the New York Times bestseller list with Black queer romance novels. Before we
Whoa.
call them, romance novels, they all have
Hmm.
romantic elements. All of his novels made the New York Times bestseller list back in the 90s and 2000s. And it was around that whole idea of cultivating audience. He knew his audience. He sold books out of his trunk of his car. He drove to pride festivals. He even went to like Black barber shops and beauty shops because he knew that while people are
Mm.
sitting there getting their hair done and getting their hair cut, they needed something to look at and read. And so he is also an inspiration to me just in terms of thinking about the marketing work that authors have to do, maybe not always want
Yes.
to do. So I think of it and I'm like, wow, that's the 90s and 2000s, and Elin Harris was doing this. So it's just amazing and awe-inspiring to me. And so I hope that more people will go back and take a look at his backlist of books because they were just so instrumental and so important and paved the way for a male-male romance as we see it today.
Hmm. So if people were to start with one, like, what do you think is a good entry point to his work?
I would say so. I'm forgetting. I can't remember if it's Just As I Am or Invisible Life, but those are the first two
Hmm.
novels, and so that's the entry point. Because then
Yep.
what happens in his series is that like most novels, it's world building. So maybe novel 3, novel 7 will have a character who was in one of the first novels who will
Hmm.
get kind of their own story, but they always go back to the initial couple of Raymond and Basil And
Oh.
and so Raymond and Basil and their friend group become this world of these, 10, 12 novels that Elin Harris wrote. So yeah, I would start with it's either Invisible Life or Just As I Am.
Hmm. I love that. So how did you start your own journey as an author?
So when I finished grad school, I moved out to Los Angeles with the aspiration of writing for a soap opera called The Young and the Restless.
Oh, yes. Okay.
However, my professional roots were in higher education. And so, I took on a job at a university, Cal State LA in Los Angeles, where I did like a lot of cultural programs and events and things like that. That helped me meet a lot of artists, authors, helped me develop a community. But I always had this nagging thing in the back of my head saying, I really want to be an author. Young and the Restless never called, never worked out. But I started taking some creative writing classes at UCLA across town. My writing teacher, her name was Carrie Madden, great teacher. She writes YA novels. She's based in Tennessee now. She really took to my work that eventually became my first novel, Down for Whatever. And so every week I would write these chapters about Black men going to a nightclub in Los Angeles. And she and the
Hmm.
classmates were so fascinated with these stories, I guess, because they never knew Black men went out to nightclubs or anything like that. So every week they would ask, well,
Right.
write about this one, write about this one. Eventually, that became Down for Whatever, my very first novel, which is about four best friends looking for love in all the wrong places in LA. And there are
Hmm.
happy endings in it too, even though it's not a categorically romance novel. So fast forward, Carrie Madden asked me to join her writers group following the class. In her writers group, there was a writer named Denise Hamilton who writes Los Angeles-based mystery novels. She was also
Mm.
a reporter for the LA Times. So this just goes to show how just being in community with people, you never know how people are going to talk about you or whatever. So I had been doing the whole trying to get a literary agent, pitching to publishers that took unagented work and everything. Rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection. One President's Day weekend, Denise Hamilton was in New York City celebrating the release of one of her novels going from hardback to softcover. And she
Hmm.
was at this party and it was her book event, but she started talking about me who was in the writing group that she was in and like yeah there's this guy writing these kind of this waiting till exhale kind of novel about these four best friends John Scanamilio, senior editor at Kensington Books, overheard her, inquired more. And like on that Monday or Tuesday morning after the 3-day weekend, he emailed me and said, I heard about you from Denise Hamilton. Can you send me the manuscript? Just like that.
Wow.
So like I had been simultaneously doing all this, getting all the rejections.
Hmm.
I've tossed them all. I don't want to have all that negative karma around me
No,
or anything like
no.
that. But John Scanamilio, wonderful person, wonderful editor. 2 weeks later, after sending him the manuscript, said, we'd like to offer you a 2-book deal.
That's
Kensington.
amazing.
And so it
Wow.
just happened like that. And so, so the lesson there, I always try to talk to, anyone, any profession, like you got to be nice to people, you got to be
Hmm.
supportive. You never know what people are going to be saying about you anywhere. And so
Hmm.
everyone's always kind of observing us. And so for that to happen that quickly is a blessing that I'm always thankful for because I know it's not that easy for everyone. And I'm not saying it was easy because I had, several hundred rejections, but
Hmm.
to have that word of mouth just meant a lot to me. And so I'm always thankful for Carrie Madden, for Denise Hamilton, John Scanamilio, for getting me into Kensington. After the 2-book deal, sales weren't what they expected or wanted them to be. And
Hmm.
so I had to think about what was next in terms of my writing career. And I don't know how I discovered Bold Strokes books. I might have
Hmm.
just been Googling, gay publishers, gay novels, who takes an agent. Oh, because my agent also left when I got
Yeah.
dropped by Kensington. And so I found Bold Strokes books, and
Hmm.
my last 4 novels have been with them. Wonderful, wonderful publisher who I've enjoyed being with as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's the thing that's interesting about Bold Strokes books. I mean, if for any of the Lesfic readers, they know them very, very well because that's the home of Melissa Beer, Wow, I put together Georgia Beers and Melissa Braden. Amazing. If Chris were here, she would be laughing at
And
me. Chris is a
Radcliffe
publisher.
and
Exactly. Like
you know what's
Radcliffe
so funny? I
started
have a
it.
coworker. So I have a well, we've been coworkers about 2 years now. And when she
Yeah.
came and she found out that I'm an author, and I told her what label I was on, she's from Boston, Katie, and she was like, I grew up reading Bold Strokes books and novels.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left Boston, I had to leave them all behind with a library because I couldn't bring all those novels. And I was like, Katie, you know about Bold Strokes? But she was like, yes, that helped me grow up. That helped me find my
Yeah.
lesbian sensibilities and everything.
Yes. And so I do think it's cool that they try to, as much as possible, serve sort of that like full spectrum. They do publish trans books, they publish gay male books, and even bringing back certain authors of classics, like when like Lee Lynch,
Mhm.
taking her backlist and bringing it all back into print was
Yeah.
so important. So yeah, so you've been published by a mainstream publisher, you're now with, a mid-sized publisher, but that's focused exclusively on LGBTQ fiction. So what do you find are the differences between working with both?
Well, Bold Strokes Books is really supportive. It's like one, the authors all know each other, or
Mhm.
pretty much know each other or learn of each other.
Yeah.
A very supportive community, both in terms of, supporting each other's books, supporting each other in terms of the writing process, doing events together and things like that. I
Mhm.
love that it's so easy to just email someone with a quick question. I try not to bug people too much because I can have a
Sure.
million questions because I work in academia, so I can have a million
Mhm.
questions, but I'm like, I'm not the only author. There's hundreds of others they're working with. So let me just keep a focused question. But I love that personal aspect in terms of the editors there, in terms of the marketing team, in terms of the acquisitions, process and everything. And I love the fact that it has built a reputation for high quality LGBTQ novels, and they really
Mhm.
care about the quality of the novels that come out. They're not just putting stuff out there just to say it's queer, it's out here, but it's high quality literature and everything. And I would say the main difference between being at Bold Strokes and like kind of a larger publisher is larger publisher, of course, more resources, more ability to kind of help push your book and everything,
Mhm.
but kind of a little less of the personal touch. Although John Scanamilio and I had a great relationship, we're still connected on social media and everything. But yeah, you're like one of a million pieces. You know what the it book is going to be of the season, and most likely
Yeah.
it's not going to be you. So you're like, okay, I got to figure out this whole doing events and marketing myself with a larger publisher. But both places, Kensington and Bold Strokes Books, very supportive places. And I've been so grateful with the experiences I've had at both.
Mhm. So you talked about who really inspired you in the beginning. Who's inspiring you now as you're kind of in the present with your author journey, but where you're also looking ahead towards the future?
Mhm, mhm. So who inspires me? So a few weeks ago, I heard you all recommend a book called A Little Kissing Between Friends by Chencia
Oh,
Higgins.
yes. I
I
love
love
that one.
Chencia's books. And I know there's the other, it's like the reality show dating book that she wrote a few years back
Yeah,
too.
that was fun. That was fun
That
too.
one-
I really enjoyed that one, but this one for me, I didn't know I've been waiting for a friends to lovers romance that is just so messy
Yes.
as she did
She
it.
really did. And I got to meet her recently at an online event, and she's wonderful. And so I'm always looking forward to what Chencia C. Higgins is going to write. I've also
Mhm.
been reading, this summer has been my reading of lesfic, sapphic
Yeah.
romance. So I
Yeah.
also read a book called The 710 Split by Karmen Lee.
Oh, I have that on my list.
It's a second chance romance novel. Two Black women working together in a high school, and they have to coach. They get asked to coach the bowling team. It is
Mhm.
so small town, really great book and everything. And then, of course, there's this other novel that's on my TBR called I think it's called Second Night Stand, and it's a
Okay.
married couple, Faye and Karelia Stetz-Waters. That's on my
Oh.
TBR. And so I'm looking forward to that as well. It's about a couple of dancers. One does burlesque, one does ballet, And I think they're trying to do some kind of reality show around dancing, and they meet and have a one night stand, and then they figure, let's do it again. And
That sounds
so I
fun.
am really excited about that book. So a couple of people who really, really inspire me now, it's straight romance, but Kennedy Ryan, who I consider like
Hmm.
the queen of current contemporary romance novels, is like my,
Yeah.
I'm such a fanboy, and
Yeah.
I just love how Kennedy Ryan's writing career has just blossomed and grown, huge
Hmm.
backlist, like 2025 novels. But I think she's showing authors the work that it takes, to build an audience, to build a community, to care about your readers, to show them respect by
Hmm.
researching thoroughly, even about communities that she's not a part of. And I love that process, when I listen to her on podcasts or at events, she talks about how, I'm a journalist first before I even write. And if I'm writing about a community that's not me, I make sure that I do dozens of interviews with people beforehand so that I'm capturing their voices in the most
Hmm.
authentic and respectful way. And so I appreciate hearing that a lot from Kennedy Ryan in her interviews. And then I just have to say, finally, because I could talk about books all day. I'm sure we could talk about
Totally.
books all day
Oh,
too.
yes.
But why am I just now discovering and reading the novels of Beverly Jenkins? I've always known Beverly Jenkins.
Oh,
Detroit
yeah.
area, Black historical romance novels, Old West back in the 1800s, post Reconstruction and post enslavement. And so I'm,
Hmm.
I'm I'm reading this Wild West series right now. I just finished a book she wrote called Forbidden, and
Yeah.
now I'm reading the second novel in that series called Breathless, and they're just so magical. And so, yeah, Beverly Jenkins is high up on my list as well, and a Detroit, Michigan area author. So I'm like, my roots are in Michigan, and so it's nice to know that
Hmm.
there's someone from that area, that Michigan's producing authors as well.
And she's just had such tremendous success, and she's so good.
So good. And again, going back to the whole research in terms of writing authentically, I love the fact that she had been a research librarian before being an author. And so it was
Hmm.
always taking in Black history in the West, and how that plays a part in what she writes. And so going back to our initial question about who can write what,
Yeah.
I think to write respectfully and to honor the communities that may not be our own identities, it goes back to that, approaching it from a doing some research, talking to people to
Hmm.
really capture those voices in an authentic way.
Absolutely. We're gonna go a little more serious, but I think absolutely important. There's
Mhm,
an organization called Authors Against Book Bans, and they're doing just a phenomenal job of highlighting the risks to continuing access to LGBTQ representation in fiction.
mhm,
I think they were really focused on some of those more grassroots style bans initially. And right now, of course, we know Project 2025 would be a nightmare for
absolutely.
many people if enacted, but specifically they're calling out LGBTQ representation in media, calling
Mhm,
it pornography, threatening, that librarians would be jailed, these kinds of things. So, what would you recommend to people who want to do something just to make sure that we're always able to read literature that represents us?
mhm. So I always recommend people getting involved on a local level first. So whether it's a school board, a library board, even just sending a postcard or a letter to the person who represents you in whatever part of the world that you're in, to let them know where you stand in terms of, these issues such as book bans, Project 2025, LGBTQ representation, people, etc. Starting local, I think, is so important because it's the local level that oftentimes impacts us quicker. Although Project 2025 is pretty scary in terms of what
Mhm.
I'm seeing in terms of what it would do nationally to and about queer literature, librarians just wanting to provide open access to people, even authors, which is, and
Mhm.
I'm hoping that more and more of the podcasts that focus on queer media, straight media, etc., will talk more about the impact on authors. A lot of the book podcasts, I hope that we'll take on this conversation as well. I think it's so
Mhm.
important. I also think that other things we can do if we're able to, make sure that you're borrowing LGBTQ books from your local library so that they see that there's a market and a need and a desire, whether it's audiobooks, electronic books, or going
Mm-hmm.
physically to the library, just borrowing it so it kind of, puts a blip in the system like someone's checking this out and everything. If you have the ability in terms of, financial, because it's an investment to buy a book. You got to think, am
Mm-hmm.
I going to buy this book or am I going to buy lunch sometimes? But, if you're able, going to local queer-owned independent bookstores or just independent bookstores in general, and going to their queer lit section and picking up a book, buying something can be meaningful both for the store and for the book in terms of its sales as well. And so those are some quick, easy things that I say that people should do in terms of this whole topic of book bans, politics, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera. It's pretty scary out there. Like when I heard about the connection of just calling everything under the LGBTQ umbrella pornography,
Yes.
and the implications around jailing people, putting people in prison for either writing or providing, I'm like, that is scary. And of course, that harkens back to things we've seen happening in Europe back in the 30s, 40s,
Uh-huh.
50s. And do we want to I think that we are bigger than the small-mindedness that is out there. And so that's why when I think about this election that's coming up in the US, I'm so optimistic about the choices that we have about whether we're moving forward or whether or not people are trying to go back to a time that wasn't inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm full of a lot of hope and optimism about what's going to be happening in the US in terms of the upcoming election cycle.
Yes. We actually in the last episode that Chris and I recorded. So for people who are listening, this will be the last episode that you just listened to. Fred and I are recording this at the very end of July. This episode should be going up mid-August or something like that. But in that episode, I was kind of like talking a little bit about this. Like, we're trying to find people to talk to on this show to figure out like what we should be doing collectively. And it was very, coming off of going to GCLS, which was
Mhm.
like going to that conference was so exciting. I'd never been before. I loved it so much. But also seeing what was happening with Project 2025 and seeing talk of reviving the Comstock Act as one example that could
Mhm.
be a mechanism for enforcing that you
Right.
can't actually distribute LGBTQ representation in media, because I think a lot of people don't understand the reason why, say, if you go back to the lesbian pulps of the 1950s, why so many of the women in them died or were
Yeah.
institutionalized or had some kind of a severe punishment, was because the Comstock Act from the late 1800s said that it was illegal
Mhm.
for the United States Postal Service to deliver lewd and lascivious, and so anything queer fell under that.
Mhm.
And yes, it's being talked about being revived mainly in the context of banning the distribution of abortion drugs. But like, let's be real, that
Right.
if they can use it for this too. But so kind of talking about that last time, and how there was this feeling of darkness and despair. And I'm not saying it's time to stop being concerned, but it was like less than an hour later that the announcement that Biden was dropping out of the race happened. Like, we had
Mhm.
finished recording and that announcement came out, and I was like, whoa, what's this going to mean? And now you and I are recording this less than a week later, and the world feels so different. And it's not done. There are still months. And heck, who knows what's going to come between now, you and I sitting here together, and
Yep.
when this actually goes live. But I do think it's important that we're all doing what we can, that these small actions all add up to a lot in terms of showing how important it is.
Absolutely. And the other thing, hearing you talk about this right now, the other thing I think we can do, and I think we can all do it. I think I have this philosophy in life that we're all teachers and we're
Mhm.
all role models. And so in terms of being teachers, we know that there is a lot of misinformation that
Yes.
happens. And, we might have people in our friend circles or our family circles who don't have accurate information. And so I
Mhm.
think that something easy that we all can do is when we get accurate information or we do read something and understand is that we can share and we can actually gently correct people and say, you know what? I heard what you said. I don't think that's fully correct. I can give you some correct information if you'd like it.
Hmm.
then offer them that opportunity to kind of course correct. And I think that's something we all can and need to do, because not everyone reads and everyone looks, goes on Google to look up what's true facts about da 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 da. And so I think
Hmm.
that, as we all learn about things happening, or that some political parties want to do, I think that one of the easy things we can do is help provide people with accurate information. And we can correct people online in a gentle way if we want to.
Of course.
In our gatherings, we can also correct people or provide them with information. It's surprising to me how what's that saying? They call it kind of low information voters, like people who just kind of vote based on an emotion and a feeling and not based
Oh,
on
yeah.
fact. And so I think
Hmm.
that for one of our responsibilities is to help low information voters kind of become high information voters.
Hmm. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to ask you the most unfair question of all, which is if you could only recommend one piece of queer media to the people who are listening, what would it be?
I'm kind of a podcast person, so
Hmm.
besides Queerly Recommended,
Of course, of
um,
course.
I'm going to sneak in two. Bad
Okay.
Queers and Minority Report are two of my other favorite queer focused podcasts I listen to.
Hmm.
Both focus on issues around queer people of color. And Bad Queers tends to focus more on lesbian issues, but queer in general. And then Minority Report focuses on, primarily a gay male perspective,
Hmm.
but also open to the whole community and about the whole community as well. So those are two pieces of media I recommend. I'm a
I love
podcast
it.
person.
Oh, absolutely. No, I love that. That's great. I definitely have to check those out. That is all for this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. How can people connect with you if they want to find you online?
Website, fredricklsmith.com. I'm on most social media at fsmith827, or you could just simply Google Frederick Smith, one and done, and something will pop up about me.
Oh, most definitely. Something will pop up. Yeah, just thank you so much. This has been
Thank
such a
you.
pleasure.
Thank
For
you.
everyone listening, if you've enjoyed the show and you haven't subscribed yet on your app, please make sure you do so you get notified when we release new episodes. If you have a friend that you think would like the show, tell them all about it. And if you want to support us, we have links in our show notes for our coffee, our newsletter, our social media sites, or you can just search for Really Recommended and you'll find them on there too. Goodbye, everybody.